Hello, this is video lecture number 26, The Capitalist Commonwealth. We have three sections that we are going to cover today. The first is banks, manufacturing and markets, and then building a transportation infrastructure, and then lastly, public enterprise, the Commonwealth system. So between 1790 and 1820, increasing numbers of Americans sought to enlarge the scope of domestic manufacturing in the new republic. The Jeffersonian Republicans, who after 1800 were in control of the executive branch and Congress, were generally hostile to the use of federal power to encourage economic growth, especially in the non-agricultural sector of the economy. Therefore, these entrepreneurial-minded merchants, artisans, and farmers looked to political leaders at the state and local level for assistance, and many received it. After the Jeffersonians allowed the First Bank of the United States to expire by refusing to renew its charter in 1811, state legislatures responded to the appeals of the mercantile community by chartering more than 240 state banks in 5 years. Additionally, state governments conferred special privileges to manufacturing and transportation companies, limiting the liability of shareholders, allowing monopolistic practices, and using the power of eminent domain to force the sale of private property for public purposes. Although these developments proceeded without the support of the President or Congress, they were aided by the Supreme Court. Led by Chief Justice John Marshall, the court issued several landmark decisions that laid the groundwork for the creation of a truly national economy. In Fletcher versus Peck, the Marshall Court upheld the inviolability of contractual obligations, in this case involving the claimants of the so-called Yazoo land fraud in Georgia, even when the circumstances under which such contracts were drawn might be much reprobated. In the Dartmouth College case, the court endorsed the argument offered by Daniel Webster, who relied on the earlier Fletcher decision to conclude that a grant is a contract, whether to private individuals or corporations, and therefore protected under the contract clause of the Constitution. Finally, in McCullough versus Maryland, Marshall ruled that the Second Bank of the United States, chartered by Congress in 1816, was necessary and proper, and therefore constitutional, and that the Maryland law placing a tax on it was unconstitutional and void because it entailed the power to destroy a legitimate federal institution. Capitalists could now move freely throughout the nation in search of opportunities, secure in the knowledge that their vested interests would be protected by the Supreme Court. So let's go to our very first section, which is banks, manufacturing, and markets. For merchants, farmers, and political leaders, republicanism meant capitalism. But to create a dynamic market economy, Americans needed a banking system. In 1791, Congress chartered the First Bank of the United States. However, it did not survive. When the bank's 20-year charter expired in 1811, President Madison did not seek its renewal. Merchants, artisans, and farmers petitioned their state legislatures then to charter new banks. And by 1816, there were 246 state-chartered banks with $68 million in banknotes in circulation. Many banks issued notes without adequate reserves and made ill-advised loans to insiders. The Panic of 1819, sparked by a sharp drop in world agricultural prices, gave Americans their first taste of the business cycle. And this is the periodic expansion and contraction of profits and employment. The Panic of 1819 also revealed that artisans and yeomen, as well as merchants, now depended on regional or national markets. And merchant entrepreneurs developed a rural-based manufacturing system similar to the European outwork or the putting out system. The economic advances that the economy enjoyed during this time stemmed primarily from innovations in organization and marketing rather than advances in technology. The penetration then of the market economy into rural areas motivated farmers to produce more and more goods. As the rural economy turned out more goods, it significantly altered the environment. By the mid-19th century, most of the forests in southern New England and eastern New York were gone, and mill dams now altered the flow of New England's rivers. The new market system decreased eventually the self-sufficiency of families and communities, even as it made them more productive and more prosperous. So let's go to our next section, building a transportation infrastructure. Improved inland trade became a high priority for the new state governments, who endeavored to overcome geographic impediments to getting goods to market. States chartered corporations to do things like dredge rivers and build turnpikes and build canals. Pennsylvania issued 55 different charters, including one to a company called the Lancaster Turnpike Company, which built a 65-mile graded road connecting Lancaster to Philadelphia, and this boosted their regional economy. Western settlers then paid premium prices for land along navigable rivers, and farmers and merchants built barges to float their goods all the way to the port of New Orleans. Okay, time for our final section, public enterprise, the Commonwealth system. Throughout the 19th century, state governments had a much greater impact on the day-to-day lives of Americans than did the national government. As early as the 1790s, state legislatures devised an American plan of mercantilism known as the Commonwealth system, as it aimed to increase the common wealth of citizens. State legislatures granted hundreds of corporate charters to private businesses to do things like build roads, bridges, and build canals, to connect inland market centers to seaport cities. They've got to get their goods from one place to another. Incorporation often included a grant of limited liability, and transportation charters included the power of eminent domain. By 1820, innovative state governments had embraced the new political economy of the Commonwealth system, which used state incentives to encourage business and to improve the general welfare. And that still happens today. Okay, this does conclude video lecture number 26. Please answer the review questions and continue on with your study.